You're listening to Chapter 2, Finding Home. They did what human beings looking for freedom throughout history have often done. They left. An excerpt from Isabel Wilkerson's 2010 book, The Warmth of Other Suns, the epic story of America's Great Migration.
We were driving from Cleveland, so we drove through Indiana, and it was like some rural parts, but we kept going, and then we drove to Illinois, and once you hit past the Chicago part, from there on, it's just so much rural stuff. Like, it was like, I was like, Dad, maybe I made the wrong choice. And he was like, maybe. Like, and this was us driving there in the summer to go to orientation.
Anasia Sturdivant is a 35-year-old queer, single mother and foster parent in Ames, Iowa. And those coos you hear? Well, that's her 1-year-old son, Isaiah, or Zay as she calls him. Anasia works in social services as a domestic abuse youth advocate. But outside of work, she's super engaged, and I mean like with both sides of the brain. In her downtime, she paints, draws, does slam poetry, but you also might catch her watching science-y videos on YouTube or conducting her own experiments. Basically, she's a lifelong learner.
And her thirst for knowledge would end up taking her all the way to Iowa State University. Back in 2005, she was on the road with her dad heading to freshman orientation. This Black Cleveland native was about to experience rural life in a way she never had before. As they drove deeper into the heartland, her dad tried to convince her it wasn't too late to turn around.
And he was like, well, can you change? And I was like, I don't think so, Dad. I gotta go here. And we get there, like, as we're pulling through Iowa, it's 3 hours from the border of Iowa to Ames. And those 3 hours felt so long. I was just like, oh my goodness, it was just like empty field after empty field, or crop field. The smells were horrible. And I just kept looking at my dad, and he kept looking at me. And like, he's like, I could tell he wanted to be like, yeah, like, let's just not do this. And he's like, you should just go to Ohio State. Like, you got in, and like, da-da-da. And I was like, nah. He was like, that's a quick drive. We could just come visit you. And that's why I didn't stay.
Anasia had no desire to stay so close to home for school, and there was really nothing her dad could say to change her mind. So on they went. And as it came up on Iowa, Anasia began to take stock of her new reality.
You smell like crops. If it's harvest season, you'll smell them. If it's not harvest season, you just see them. Or you smell the livestock, or it's a dairy farm, and dairy farms always just smell weird. Like, it's not like, doesn't smell like cheese or milk or something. It's just a weird smell in the air. Or you smell the livestock, so like manure or pigs and like all that kind of stuff. I was a big pork producer. I didn't know that. And you just smell the pigs driving on the highway in those trucks, and then it's just like, and I'm like, thank God I don't eat pork. It was just so empty, and I just still remember how distinct the smell was in my nose. Maybe that's why I still smell it to this day, because of how much it imprinted on me.
In those early days when Anasia was new to the state, she couldn't get over how much space there was. Ames, with its small college town vibe and close-knit community, became home. Even though it's not rural per se compared to the towns and counties that surround it, it still felt very rural to Anasia, especially compared to Cleveland.
In an alternate world, Hilo, Hawaii to be exact, Ciara, Gardenia, Fawn, Hunter Morning had no qualms at all about making the big move from her hometown of Los Angeles to the Aloha State. She knew ever since she was a little girl that she was destined to live there.
When I was 7 years old, like, probably I could say like my earliest, like 7, I have a voice that talks to me, and it told me, like, my voice was like, you will never be truly happy until you leave. And the first time I went to Kauai, which is the smaller island, and it's the last, basically on the tail, one of the main islands. And literally, like, when I got here, I was like, what? Like at 10, like, what? This is where I'm supposed to be. Like, what are you talking about? Me go back to Los Angeles? What? It was like my dream was like, or it was like in this, it really existed. And I was like, wow. And then, like, from then, I was 10. So I was like, okay, I didn't know manifesting and blah, blah, blah. But I knew that I wanted to live in Hawaii.
Today, Ciara is 43. She's a hairstylist and yoga instructor, and slowly but surely studying for her real estate license. She's married to her husband, Daryl, and the mother of 5. 2 daughters, Ciara, who's 6, and 3-year-old Lilinoy, a cat named Sage, and a couple of parrots, too. And when she's not in the house, cooking her favorite dishes or tending to her family, you can find Ciara out in nature, swimming, hiking, or out in her garden.
Like, I have a strawberry patch. I pick my daily strawberries. I mean, I have like chocolate ghost peppers. I have like Hawaiian chili peppers. But we've planted like a Samoan coconut tree, which is a dwarf coconut tree. Like, literally, I met the mothers and the sisters of my tree, and it's like the coconuts hang like, I'm almost 6 feet tall, so the coconuts hang like right here at my face, and like they're tiny trees. And I had like, when I saw them, I got it for my birthday. I was like literally crying because it's what I've always wanted, because they're hard to find.
And as you can probably tell, she's always been a free spirit and one with the earth. She hears voices, gentle ones that guide her and challenge her to be her truest self. After that first trip to Hawaii at age 10, Wanderlust took her back again and again in her early 20s.
Then I would always, like, when I got like in my 20s, my friends and I, we would always go to Oahu, which is where Waikiki is. It's like small and crowded, and it's a beautiful island. And I was just like, I love it here, but it's not where I'm supposed to be. I remember one time, like, we were young and broke, and like we all like rented like a Jeep. It was like all of us like piled in. And then like, I don't really like to be around a lot of people that long. Like, we were there for a week and like or 10 days, and all my friends, and I'm just like, holy shit, like, like, okay. So we all got in the car. I'm like, I'll sit in the very back, and I'm watching the ocean, and the ocean literally, like Moana, you've seen Moana, like the ocean literally, like, I was 24 years old, and the ocean was like, come on, what are you waiting for? And I literally like looked closer, like, did you just talk to me? Like, okay, but I didn't tell anybody at the time, because then you're like, okay, Ciara.
Anasia and Ciara were both called away from home early on in their lives, much like their own grandparents who made the Great Migration from the Deep South decades before. Ciara's dad's side of the family had come from Georgia, while her mom is white and indigenous, coming from the Tongva Nation, the original people of Los Angeles. Ciara and her younger brother, they grew up with all of their family around. They lived together in the apartment complex her dad's parents owned in Windsor Hills, one of LA's historically Black neighborhoods.
We all just lived in the apartments, like my mom and me, and my father, and my great-grandmother, and my auntie and her husband, and my uncle. Yeah, for a while. I mean, eventually we moved on.
Back then, Ciara was all about the beauty of terrariums and daydreaming about tropical climates.
I grew up in LA. Like, I love the rain. I love all of that. And like, I was just like, I would like, when it would rain when I was a kid, I would like take my umbrella outside, and I would like, in my panties in the backyard, I would like dance and sing in the rain. Like, my mom like, oh my God. And I always collected lizards, mo'os, geckos, mo'o in Hawaiian, like frogs and blah, 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 blah stuff. Like, I had a terrarium. My grandma made me a terrarium, and like I always had them, and I loved them, right?
But as she got older, Ciara's playground expanded to the entire city.
I had fun in high school. We had fun. We were crazy, dude. I went to Hamilton High School. I went to the music academy. I didn't really go to class that often. And I used to, my friends, we're still friends to this day. We used to work at Ripley's, believe it or not. And we used to like on Hollywood Boulevard, and we used to like take the school bus to Hollywood Boulevard. And we knew like everybody on Hollywood Boulevard. We knew like all the homeless people, all the Michael Jackson impersonators, all the pimps, all the security guards. We had fun.
Speaking of city life, I can't help but think of New York City. Up in the Bronx, you'll find Lena and Estefany, the hosts of Bag Ladies, a podcast about baggage, yours, mine, and ours. But really, it's the kind of kiki that helps all of us become more vulnerable about the way that the world affects us and our ability to live our truest, most authentic lives. Lena and Stephanie know that being vulnerable is radical and necessary to building a more inclusive world. So each week, they talk about what's happening in the news, politics, different baggage topics, and of course, they crack hella jokes. So talk about a winning combination. The show has even been featured on Shondaland, Spotify, Complex, and more. And the best thing? They're back with a brand new season. And if you're into history happening right now in real time, another show you'll enjoy is People, Place, Power, a new podcast that explores big questions about activism through the eyes of changemakers around the world. Their first season explores how activists from India to Haiti to Afghanistan are using comedy, technology, and the power of their own bodies to create real change. You can listen and subscribe to People, Place, Power and Bag Ladies wherever you get your podcasts. Now back to the show.
Before heading to Iowa, city life was all Anasia knew. And despite the hustle, it's where she felt the most comfortable.
I grew up in East Cleveland first. And East Cleveland is like, I wouldn't call it a suburb of Cleveland. It's more ghetto than Cleveland. So, but at the time I was living there, growing up in the 90s, it was like fourth largest crime rate in the nation per capita. Like, it was just really bad for it to be such a tiny place. But it was home, you know? Like, I'd walk down the street and I actually felt safe, even though, like, I knew what gang lived on this street, and I knew that a couple streets down, it was a different gang, and that they ain't like each other, but they were cool with me because they see me walk down the street every day. And I like the fast pace. Like, I like that there was always something happening.
East Cleveland wasn't just her stomping grounds. It was where her family called home.
Yeah, and like, I grew up, it was usually my brother and I. He and I grew up together in the same home with both our parents until, I think the first time we moved out, I was 9. Then we moved back in, and then we moved out again. I was like 12-ish. And so that changed our dynamics, I guess, a little bit. It changed our dynamics a lot of bit when after the separation and then eventually divorce.
Like Ciara, Anasia also lived with her paternal grandma, Mama, for a time.
She passed away in 2015, but I was always at her house, usually with her. When I got sick at school, you know, we called Mama, and so Mama came and got me and stuff. She'd be like, "You really sick?" And then I threw up in her car that one time. Oh, man. But yeah, she was always the one that kind of looked out for us. Like, I learned how to cook from her. Like, yeah, my mom can cook, but like, I watched my mama because she's from Selma, Alabama, you know, so got to see that different upbringing from her than what my parents were teaching me, being from the north for the most part. My dad was born in Alabama, but he came up north when he was 5, so.
Despite being the youngest in the family, Anasia held her own at home, but also on the playing field.
Even though, like, people always say it was such a bad neighborhood, or there's, like, even jokes about don't go to the mistake on the lake, like, I really enjoyed, like, our summers playing baseball. Like, I played summer leagues of baseball, and I also did football one summer. I enjoyed, like, going to those. Like, my dad was the coach when we were younger, but then as we got older, you know, there were other coaches that we had. But, like, just playing at, like, Forest Hill Park in the summers was like, it was probably the best memories I had as a kid, you know. Like, my home was pretty rough, and we had a lot of things going on in our family life. But going to those parks with, like, my brother and my best friend Daryl across the street, it was like a community that we had built for ourselves with just us amongst kids, you know.
East Cleveland gave Anasia a vision of what community and safety could look like. As she got settled in Iowa with that vision in mind, Anasia realized she'd have to be intentional about creating a nourishing space for herself. But in small, overwhelmingly white Ames, where Black people make up only 3% of the population, that was easier said than done.
I remember being in school at Iowa State and standing at the bus stop, and the guy being like, behind me, he was like, "Man, they're multiplying." And then the guy next to him goes, "What are you talking about? Who?" He's like, you know, Black folks. And he was like, "What do you mean Black folks are multiplying?" And he was like, look, there's another nigga right there in front of us. And I like look over my shoulder and I look around. I'm like, he's talking about me. And like, and I'm 18 and I'm like, is this how I was supposed to be here? Like, that scared the mess out of me as an 18-year-old coming from Cleveland. And to hear that from some dude, but like, luckily that wasn't most of the people in college, but it was still like that in the town. Like, it was still like that in Ames. So like, when you walked around Ames, you still knew, and then you explain it to friends like, oh no, that was a very racist thing. And they're like, really? I didn't even catch that. I was like, when you get a certain age, you've already experienced enough that you can tell by the way somebody even talks to you that they're looking down on you or that it's a racist undertone.
On top of navigating being Black in Iowa, college was also a time and space where Anasia was coming into her own as a queer woman.
So yeah, I grew up always, talking to dudes, liking dudes, wanting to date dudes, marry a dude, that kind of thing. I would say in college, actually. I hate to be one of those cliche college people, but man, ugh. But yeah, it was in college is when I first saw this girl in the dorm, Petey, and I saw her and I was like, dang, she looked good. And I was like, huh. And it was a little bit more than the usual, like, oh, that woman is beautiful. Like, because you can say that in our society as a woman. But, it was just like something about her. I had more of an attraction. And then I got to know her and I started liking her more and more. And I was like, wow. And she was just one of my friends. But it was just a weird attraction for me. But I think I did probably have a crush in high school now that I look back on somebody that was on our softball team. And so I was like, okay, like, maybe I did always like females and I just didn't know it. Or I hadn't ran into any that I was attracted to.
Sophomore year, Anasia started identifying as bisexual. She started learning more about herself and the full breadth of what being queer could look like. By her senior year, Anasia identified more closely as a queer pansexual woman.
Pansexual is a little bit different because it's not really gender specific. It's more of like, you understand that there could be one or two genders and like, or you can understand that people just don't identify with any of those societal norms of a gender. And so like, I usually date someone based on personality. Like, I get more attracted to somebody the more I know them. Versus the physical attraction. Like, physical attraction for me might die off really quickly. Like, so I might see somebody as one of those like universal finds, like, oh, you look good, like a crush on Uncle Jesse or something from Full House when you're a kid. Like, you're like, oh, he look good, but then you get to know John Stamos and you're like, it's like, so it's kind of like that. When you're pansexual, you meet someone and the more you start to click, the more you're connected to them, and the more you become attracted to them in sexual nature, and as well as a mental state. And so I'd say probably that's how I would describe pansexual, but you can ask the next person and they'll probably say something different. There's not really too much of a Black queer community, but there is a queer community that's rather large. Like, Ames is pretty accepting of the queer community, which is kind of crazy because I feel like they're more accepting of the queer community than they are of people of color.
For all the obstacles she had to deal with in Ames, Anasia made the situation work. She found a refuge volunteering and eventually working with survivors of domestic and sexual abuse. And to be honest, it was the one thing that kept her in Iowa over all these years.
Most people that are from out of state here all say like something about Ames and parts of Iowa are they hold you captive. But like, there are even bumper stickers that's in the shape of Iowa and it says captive, so like Iowa captive, and then there's some that say native inside of them. And so I feel like I've always been trying to get out because I do feel like I was stuck here. Like, I didn't feel like I belonged. Like, felt like I stood out like a sore thumb.
While Anasia was feeling captive in Ames, Ciara was tucked away in Hilo's lush mountainside.
Well, Hilo's a small town. We're right. It's called Waikea. It's like right. Well, the Big Island is made up of 5 volcanoes. So we live in the middle of Mauna Kea and Mauna Loa. And we live like right in like the rift zone, we like to call it. Like, we live like right up in the middle, like right, like nestled in the middle, up the mountain a little bit. Yeah. And there too, Mauna Kea is not active, but Mauna Loa is pretty active. It hasn't been recently, but yeah. But Kilauea is the world's most active volcano. It is a small, quiet town. Like everybody, like you just know each other because like you're always walking around. And I mean, like me, like who I am, I'm like I never forget a face, but I can't. It's hard for me to recall. So it's like constantly like you see people and like you're like, how do I know that person? You know, it's just really whimsical. It rains a lot, but it's warm. I love it. It's a small town. It's amazing, sweet. The beaches are different than the other side of the island. We have less beaches, but they're so magical what we do have. Our neighborhood is all Japanese, like 97%. But we were like, I wonder how they're going to take us, you know? But everybody's been like really nice.
Life in Hilo was obviously so different than everything Ciara was used to in LA. It was kind of like she found a life-size terrarium of her own to finally call home. And it didn't hurt that the people there were kinder and much calmer, and the anxiety she had as a Black woman on the mainland, they were far less pronounced.
You know, like, it's not like people don't honk at each other and like, you know, it's just cool. Like, it's totally different than Los Angeles. No police presence. I mean, there are police, obviously, but it's a totally different energy. And like most of the police are of color, you know, of course. Yeah, but you're not like, oh my God, like where I just didn't even look at when I saw like a cop car, you know, I saw a popo like drive, like you don't even look at them in Los Angeles. Like the energy, like just keep looking straight. Here, it's not like that. It's like, oh, why not? I definitely feel safe.
Starting over in rural Hawaii with her family gave Ciara a chance to live life abundantly, freely, and finally, at her own pace.
Ciara and Anasia each took different paths to arrive home. But just like Shayla and Eric from last episode, the thing that all four of these parents have in common is they were all intentional about taking control of not only where they call home, but how they shape these homes for themselves and their families. On the next episode of Natal, we explore how a few of them first came to learn about their bodies, sex, and even having babies too.